Got to be honest, I had quit the church for like 2 months. And I told myself, hey, this is a promotion. I came to Christ as an adult, and I felt like I was good. I was all set. I mean, I had a prayer routine, I was reading the word regularly, and I felt like I'd gotten everything I needed from church. You know, the Christian fellowship, the community, I'd gotten all of it. So, hey, I'm good. I thought I built a better system, better than the one a church leader, someone's grandfather. You know, honestly, I didn't see the sense of sitting in a folded chair in a church basement every Wednesday like he did. I just didn't think the next 40 years should be like that. I was going to be more efficient. He looked like he's just showing up. About 2 months in, I noticed something. I was growing in my understandings of Christ's teachings. My study Bible was good, but something was missing. I felt hollow. I was doing the right things without any feelings. I had to ask myself, now what? Listen, I'm not confessing to being lazy. What I'm owning up to is having faith in a system I made that looked airtight, but it wasn't. And if you've built a similar system, a private, well-organized, one-person version of Christianity, you're not weak or faithless, and you're not doing it wrong because of some arbitrary rule. You're missing something the writer of Hebrews thought was so important, he built an entire argument around it. By the way, there's a Greek word for what you're missing that changes everything. I'll get to that. Here's the part nobody warns you about. Isolation doesn't announce itself. It's not like danger. It can even feel real peaceful. So it builds slowly and innocently. You skip the awkward small talk with folks after the service, especially a guy who asks too many questions. Come on, man. It's early in the morning for all that. And the volunteer sign-up sheet you never wanted to even touch feels real natural now. Kind of ignore it, like you've even gotten a win. You've traded all that for quiet. And quiet feels like good, right? Let me break it to you gently. You're not the first, and it's not a new thing that we're talking about. In fact, the writer of Hebrews saw this exact pattern 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years before podcasts and the internet were ever a thing. In chapter 3, he writes to a group of Jewish believers who were drifting back towards their old ways. Why? One excused absence at a time. His words, "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." Look at that word he chose. Not weekly, not when it's convenient for you. Every day. He's not describing a scheduled preference. He's describing how fast heart can harden, how fast we can find ourselves moving away from Christ when nobody's close enough to notice what's actually happened, or how far away you've actually moved. If I didn't live it and didn't know what it's like to move through it, I'd be thinking probably the same thing you are right now. Hey, listen, Trip, I can handle it. I'm different, and guess what? That seems pretty spot on because I didn't feel hardened during any of it. That's the scary part. That's what scares me. The hardening doesn't feel like it's hardening while it's happening. Kind of like a phone that you see's at 9%. I've never watched that number drop on my phone. I just looked up and hey, my phone was almost dead. And I liked the independence of being kind of far away too, to be perfectly honest. But here's the truth. When you choose to be a Christian who goes it alone, you're going to drift. Not because you woke up one morning and decided, hey, let's drift today, but because at a distance, you're left walking around, challenging your own assumptions and beliefs. That's what distance does. I want you to know what I was missing on my solo Christian journey and what most people miss when they read Hebrews 10. Now, did you notice the writer of Hebrews didn't open up with a command to show up? He opens with what Christ had already done. Right before the verse everyone quotes, the writer spends 9 chapters building one argument. Christ's sacrifice was once for all. Finished, sealed, nothing left to add. By the way, that's why a verse or two can't carry this argument alone. It needs the other 9 chapters behind it. Only after you're laying that 9-chapter foundation, the author wrote the verse people love slapping on every graphic. And let us consider how to spur one another on to love and good deeds. Let us not neglect meeting together, as some have made a habit, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. That phrase, the day approaching, that's not vague optimism. It's a reference to the second coming of Christ, his return. See what the writer's doing there. The writer is telling us a group of tired, scattered believers that they're living in the gap between the resurrection and the return of Christ. We're in that gap too, right? And that gap is exactly where the drift happens the fastest. Not because they were bad people, but because an unwatched heart cools. So the order, it matters. He doesn't say gather and maybe Christ will meet you there. That's not what he says. He says Christ already met you at the cross once, permanently. So now you have to draw near. That's all you got to do. Because you draw near, gather together. And because you gather, you end up holding each other steady when the ground shifts. And guess what? Life's taught me the ground shifts. You might agree with that part. Do you see what I did? I had built a solo Christian practice backwards. I was trying to get close to Christ through better content, better habits, better solitude. In other words, once again, Tripp thought he knew better. But Hebrews 10 says that closeness was never the missing piece. Christ already closed the distance. What I was missing was the people he intended me to walk with, so that my path would lead to him. Now here's a fascinating thing about this idea that we're intended to walk together and do it with Christ. There's a word the New Testament uses for this type of community that doesn't translate real clean into English. The word is koinonia. Fellowship comes close, but koinonia means something closer, like a shared life, not attendance, not regular get-togethers. It means joint participation. Acts explains this. In Acts 2, right after the church was born at Pentecost, Luke describes what the earliest believers actually did with their days. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to koinonia, to breaking bread and praying, doing it together. Not a service you attend once a week for an hour and beat it out. A life they held in common, together. It's not a one-off. The New Testament writers back it up with a pattern so consistent, it's almost easy to miss. Scholars count over 50 commands built around one word, allelone, one another. Love one another, carry one another's burdens, confess to one another, spur on one another. Not one of those 50 commands can be obeyed by a person sitting alone in a room. Can't happen. Even if a podcast is playing. Nope, can't do it. And Paul makes this structural in 1 Corinthians 12 when he describes the local church as the body of Christ. Every part connected, every part necessary. A hand doesn't function cut off from the body. Neither do we. Let me stop here and say it straight, because we both need this reminder regularly. If you've been trying to be a Christian and doing it alone, quietly, efficiently, telling yourself, hey, it's discipline, so it's good. And it might be. Or you might be building months of hardening and distance from Christ. A distance you can't even feel yet. Because the only person checking your spiritual temperature is the person who has every reason to lie to you about it. And that's you. Trust me, I've been there, lied to this face in the mirror. And what you actually need is a Christian accountability partner, someone in your local church, even one person who can see what you can't see about yourself. Now, understand, that's not weakness. That's what sanctification, the actual process of growing to look more like Christ, is supposed to require. Not want, require. So slow down if you think that's an accusation, because it's not. Remember, Christ already finished the part that required perfection. This part, the part where you and I draw near to people, was never meant to be the hard part. In fact, just the opposite. But it got harder because we stopped doing what we needed to do. If you're asking, okay, Trip, now what? And you're a little upset about it, relax, because the answer, it's easy. You don't need a 5-step plan. All you need, one person. Not a perfect church, not a small group with all matching journals. One person this week, one honest conversation where you say out loud, I've been doing this alone, and it's not working the way I thought it would. If you're thinking that's weakness, if you're thinking, hey, sounds like quitting to me, Trip, consider this. Hebrews 3 calls it exhortation. God emphatically urging us to do it because it's good for us and because we need it. Hebrews 10 calls it spurring one another on. Different words, yeah, but the same command. Told to the people who thought they could hold their own heart steady. They could go it alone without anyone else's hand at the wheel. I went back to church, not because a podcast told me to, but because I was lucky enough to see where I had moved to. And to no small degree, I returned. And guess what? That church leader, the one who sat in that folding chair every Wednesday, noticed I'd been missing. That's what he noticed. And he didn't just notice. You know what? He actually cared and showed me that. And that meant more than I ever would have thought it possibly could. I was back at church, and I haven't built a private system since. Now, let's go watch this next video together and keep walking with Christ, because that's what we're doing here. This can be part of that bigger equation as well. So I want to watch this with you now. Let's go watch it. I'll see you over there.